In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. AI bots like ChatGPT are getting dumber the longer that they interact with humans.
Now, usually when we think about ChatGPT or like GPT-4, right, we think of that as a single model, right? You should be able to ask ChatGPT a question today, and if I ask the same question tomorrow or next week, it should give me mostly the same answer back, right? It's the same model. But I think what's really interesting is that these models are changing over time, right? Because they are getting feedback from the humans, right? This process called reinforcement learning from human feedback. They're also getting additional fine tuning. So the model, it's not the same model, right? ChatGPT, a week or a month from now, it could be a very different model from the one that we're working with right now, right? So this actually motivated us to try to monitor how does the behavior of these generative AI, like large language models, how does the behavior actually change over time, potentially as a result of interacting with users and users like us. And you might have expected that these models should be getting better and better over time, or at least that's our hope, right? They should be improving. But maybe the big surprise that we found was that that's the case in some aspects, right? So these models are getting better in some of the components. Maybe they're getting safer, for example, right? GPT-4 is getting safer over time. However, the model is also getting worse, substantially worse in many of the other components, right? So for example, if I ask the model to do chain of thought reasoning, which is a common technique, right? So the ability of ChatGPT-4 to do chain of thought reasoning, that seems to have really degraded over time.
Which brings me to a shower thought. Seeing how computer systems get progressively dumber the more that they interact with average people, as opposed to being programmed by, scientists and thinkers and think tank people, just average, ordinary Joes. You realize that it's not just computer systems that are affected adversely, but all systems, social systems, political systems, religious systems. For instance, republics, how republics kind of degrade and decay and turn into democracies. As you know, Aristotle warned about that. He said that like all forms of government, degrade and become, another form of government. They, monarchies degrade into tyranny, aristocracy degrades into oligarchy, and so republics have a bad habit of going from one form of government, which would be ruled by an aristocracy, right? So if you go to the Roman Republic, it was not average people who were running it, but the aristocracy was running it. Same thing in ancient Greece. Women and slaves and kind of working class people, they didn't get a vote. They didn't get a say. That was not a staple of that form of government. It was usually, ruled by the best, ruled by an elite is essentially what that was, or you could take another view of it and say that it was, mob families, patrician families that were essentially running things. And then little by little, though, they start making concessions and they start to decay as ordinary people come into the systems. And, like for instance, people wonder what's the difference between a republic and a democracy. In a republic, it's ruled by quality. In a democracy, it's ruled by quantity, right? In a republic, you care about individual rights. In a democracy, there are no individual rights. It's just mob rule. So you'll hear these greatest good arguments. You've got to give up your rights. It's for the greatest good for the greatest number. These are hallmarks of democracies. And this is why H.L. Mencken said, as democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. We move towards a lofty ideal. On some great and glorious day, the plain folk of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be adorned by a downright moron. That brings us to this clip of the memory-challenged Joe Biden losing even the mainstream media support.
Let's talk about the story on the front
cover. The story is Biden can't remember when he was vice president, and this is tragic, really, or it's not tragic, or it's good news. But Joe Biden, this is commentary from the prosecutors who were checking whether they should prosecute Joe Biden in the same way they prosecuted Donald Trump. A little bit of fairness.
Yes.
And they said Joe Biden can't remember a thing. But then again, that's the best kind of defense, really.
Yeah.
It worked for
Reagan.
Ronald Reagan in Contra
You just say,
Gate.
I forgot.
I forgot.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something, the Democrats, they don't care that Joe Biden is an idiot. They don't care.
He's not an idiot, though, is he? But he may arguably have some cognitive decline.
Let's say he's dead in the head. I don't know what word to use. I was going to use a word, but I didn't want to use that word, so I called him an idiot.
So dead in the head.
So actually, idiot was your version of being kind.
Yes.
Basically.
Being kind and avoiding being canceled because you can't call somebody that word anymore.
You can call him what you like.
Certain wise people have made the observation that if we have a system that can afford to have someone with clinical dementia in the executive branch, it shows how little we need the executive branch and how everything can be run more effectively at the local level regarding social systems. And this brings us into international news. Erik Prince, founder of the mercenary organization Blackwater, now rebranded as XE, is advocating for colonizing Africa.
Then it's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens, because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually making their country a better
People on the left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Erik Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes.
Prince's comments kind of remind me of Alvin Toffler, the futurist back in 1980 in the third wave, who made the point that this is what creating new markets means. You'll hear people on the right especially talk about, oh, isn't it great? We're creating new markets, and what that euphemism actually, represents. And he points out that, for instance, creating new markets would be going to colonial Africa and kind of, having corporations come in and you kind of, upset the social systems that are there, and you install a dictator whose sole job is to get people down in the uranium mines, with machine guns, and to start, marching farmers off of their farms and getting them down to, pick cobalt or mine, lithium or silver for our components. And, when you do this, of course, you upset the system of the place insofar as, you have no men in the village anymore. You have nobody passing on the legends and the culture to the younger generation. And, there's nobody there to grow the food anymore, or to build the huts, or to get the water and all these things. And so then the women have to essentially leave. And then the Westerners are there saying, oh, isn't this wonderful? Now the women have to, leave the home too, because the man can't provide, what he was providing before. They were outside the money system. Before, when they were outside the money system, they made their own food, made their own shelter, made their own clothing. They didn't really require money for anything. But now that the men are gone, and there's nobody actually providing for those needs, now the women are told, hey, you can go earn these Chuck E. Cheese tokens. Now the children are gone. And the Westerners love this because they can create new schools that will teach them not their own culture, not their own heritage, not their own legends, but teach them about, the glories of feminism or LGBT ideology or something like that. Which brings me to another shower thought. No. Well, the shower thought that I had was the concept that when people talk about capitalism, they talk about socialism, and how socialism thinks that the pie is the same size, and it causes envy among people who are going to be fighting over the scraps. And it says capitalism is about growing the pie, right? But just to unpack that, capitalism's on growing the pie requires the capitalist system to essentially keep growing, which means colonizing other places, taking their resources for our components, for our finished goods. And it kind of reminds me of Phaleus of Chalcedon in Politics by Aristotle. He talks about the world's first socialist, and he starts promising people equal land. And this sounds wonderful. Hey, we all get equal parcels of land. But the downside to that came when demographic, increases happened, and there were more people being born, which means now you need more land, which means that he started attacking neighboring city-states, and they were constantly at war. So to grow the pie that you need, means that you're taking over more and more land and resources. And this brings us to News of the Weird. Husband, 63, died beside his wife when liters of blood shot out of his nose and mouth all over the interior of the plane in front of screaming passengers flying from Bangkok to Germany. Horrified air passengers screamed and were left traumatized yesterday when a German husband started coughing up liters of blood in front of his wife before collapsing and dying mid-flight. The 63-year-old traveler, who has not been named, was said to have boarded the Lufthansa flight from Bangkok to Munich visibly ill before his condition rapidly deteriorated. It was absolute horror. Everyone was screaming, fellow passenger Martin Missfelder, 53, from Zurich, Switzerland, told Swiss outlet Blick. The man, who was traveling with his Filipino wife, had got on with cold sweats and was breathing much too quickly before passengers rushed to help him, offering chamomile tea and taking his pulse. But as the plane took off, his health went quickly downhill. The man was said to have been spitting into a bag when a gush of blood came out of his mouth and nose, splattering the walls of the Airbus A380 aircraft. One wonders if this might be a prelude to the so-called Disease X that the World Economic Forum keeps hinting at. And if it is, then we can look forward to many more deaths, which leads us to our obituary section. Acclaimed Japanese conductor Seiji Ozawa, who led the Boston Symphony Orchestra, dies at age 88. Seiji Ozawa, the Japanese conductor who amazed audiences with the lithe physicality of his performances during 3 decades at the helm of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, has died, his management office said Friday. He was 88. The internationally acclaimed maestro, with his trademark mop of salt and pepper hair, led the BSO from 1973 to 2002, longer than any other conductor in the orchestra's history. From 2002 to 2010, he was the music director at the Vienna State Opera. He died of heart failure Tuesday at his home in Tokyo, according to his office, Verosa, Japan. Well, now that the conductor has been conducted to heaven, I should follow his example and bow out in a well-composed manner. So, thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.